Now, is this the beginning of the end for Putin? There's been a dramatic escalation of infighting overnight between the leaders of the Russian army and its Wagner mercenary force.
Yevgeny Perashin claims the military leadership caused the deaths of 2,000 of his fighters and has vowed to stop the evil. The Defence Ministry denies the allegations. The security in Russia has been tightened and Vladimir Putin has given a televised address, accusing the Wagner Group of a stab in the back and saying Russia is facing treason.
Well, joining us to explain what's happening is Russian historian and author Martyn Whittock. So, Martyn, is this the military turning against Putin? And if so, why?
Good question. I don't think it's the end of Putin, as Wagner, and we should remember this is a mercenary group, not the Russian army per se, isn't actually strong enough to take on the Russian military and the extensive security apparatus. I read it, important as it is, as the latest dramatic escalation of what we can describe as a turf war between Prigozhin and Wagner and the army, and something of a desperate move against his establishment enemies, primarily Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov, who's the chief of the general staff of the Russian armed forces, and since November, the commander of all Russian forces in Ukraine. And it's rather like an overmighty baron, perhaps a boyar in the Tsar's Russia, striking out against his elite rivals who he thinks are not supporting him and are stabbing him in the back, while protesting. He's not actually trying to topple the Tsar. But the key thing is, Prigozhin has got himself into such a conflict with the military. I just don't think there's a way back for him now. And I think he's basically bet the farm on this striking out against the military. But I don't see he has the ability to actually topple them or Putin. But it shows the mess Putin has got Russia into. And there must be people, Putin loyalists in the security apparatus, who both hate Wagner, hate Prigozhin, but are also increasingly beginning to question the mess that the boss has caused. And I think that's the biggest threat to Putin. There must be senior people thinking, what a mess. You know, the special military operation that was supposed to be over in a few weeks is dragging on, and now we are fighting ourselves. The Ukrainians must be watching this with glee.
Do you think that this is going to, I mean, in terms of what's going to happen in Ukraine, obviously the Ukrainians have started their counter-offensive against the Russians, and obviously there's a dispute as to how well that is going. Do you think that we are now, even if we're not seeing the end of Putin, do you think there's a realistic chance that this could be the beginning of the end of the war in Ukraine?
Sadly, I don't think we're at the end game yet. I wish we were. But what we are seeing is the extraordinary pressure and crisis this has caused to the Russian military. It really has exposed the inadequacies of the Russian military. The fact that it is relying on this mercenary force that first came to our attention in 2014 and has become quite famous in the Middle East and Africa, that's the Wagner Group under Prigozhin, shows how desperate they are. I mean, we may remember that just a few months ago, they were emptying out jails, prisons to get people to fight for Wagner. They were burning through so many military personnel. So I don't think this is the end of Putin. I think that the Russian military has the capability to crush this. But I think this shows how fragmented the Russian military now is and the stress that Putin has put Russia under as he's sought to strike out against Ukraine. He can't blame the West for this one, can he? NATO haven't caused this to happen. This is basically chickens coming home to roost for Putin. He's got nobody to blame but himself for basically promoting people like Prigozhin. For years, he's given him what's called in Russia, Kreisha. That's roof, that's protection. And now Prigozhin has turned against him. Where's Putin going to go now? It's a big question this morning.
Well, where is he going to go now? And is it not a lesson for him that he really does have to look after his military, his fighting force? Is he paying them enough? Are they suffering too many deaths? Have they got enough food? What's he going to do for them?
That's a really very good question and a really very, very good point. The irony is that one of the roles of Wagner in Ukraine was to actually take the hits away from the Russian military. And in fact, they've suffered huge losses that Wagner have, taking, for example, Bakhmut, which the Russian military couldn't. So in a strange way, this group, which in some ways was there to designed to take the heat off the Russian military, is now itself revolting. And I think it does go to show that Putin has to take care of his military. He has to husband and gather his resources much more carefully. But it also shows that he is beginning to run out of options when even his own fragmented military are turning against him. At least part of it is turning against him. I think he'll crush this. I think he will not be toppled by this, but I think he will be significantly weakened by this. And that will be, I think, a contributory factor in what will eventually be the end game.
Martyn Whittock, thank you very much indeed.